discuss and ponder upon some topics and initiate the conversation about what constitutionalism really stands. So, as a few of the students here are just initially in their initial years of law school, I think it would really benefit them if we could establish a sense of pride in our constitution, as well as to explain to them how constitutionalism is different from any other school of thought that we would discuss today. To begin the conversation, I would invite Namit sir to initiate the talk.
Thank you, Shahid. Very rainy morning to all of you. We are privileged that we have two Shekars with us today. Senior Advocate Mr. V. Shekhar, distinguished member of the bar, and Mr. Shekhar Nafar, another senior advocate, very distinguished member of the bar. An artist once went to present his piece. He presented his piece for 10 long minutes. When he devoted the stage, his manager asked him, "How do you think, how was your performance today?" He looked at him and said, "I could have presented another piece of 10 long minutes with the notes I left." So the topic locating Indian constitutionalism is a very vast topic. I try to justify it, how to cover everything. It's difficult, but let me in any case try to justify it today. Starting with Constitution, subject to my limits of comprehension, Constitution is mainly classified into two main parts, written and unwritten. The written Constitution is the text of the Constitution, the body of the Constitution with the founding fathers and mothers. They drafted in and then subsequent amendments over the years. The unwritten Constitution is what judiciary supplanted through various doctrines, accepted, borrowed, modified, implemented in our judicial system. Beginning with the written Constitution, let me classify the whole written Constitution into three major parts. The Constitutional project, how the Constituent Assembly came into picture, how they drafted it, Indian Independence Act. And the Assembly debates, they're very interesting. I will share a few interesting anecdotes with you. And then the final draft and the subsequent amendments, how the Irish Constitution. Now, Indian constitutional project can be described in many ways. For few, it was a social revolution for Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru, it was a social revolution, a socialist by nature. For few, it was a political project. In any case, a constitution of a country is a political document. It's treated as a political project by the select few. For few, it was an academic exercise. We had very notable academicians in the assembly debates, in the Constituent Assembly. Now, our constitution shows deep political consensus. There's a balance of power amongst rival political groups. There's very strong resistance from communists, a group of socialists, how to not come up with a constitution at all, because they were of the they apprehended that you'll fail if you go for a constitution. This country will fail if you go to. So it had to be drafted in a way overthrowing a constitution, so that overthrowing a constitutional settlement will become almost impossible. It had to be drafted this way, calculated. Now the seeds of the constitution were sown way back in 1920 in the Lahore session, which was presided by Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru. 4 weeks later, on 26 January 1930, it was declared to be the Purna Swaraj Day. Now, in the meanwhile, there were a lot of the Quit India movement was there, a lot of pressure was there. There were two world wars, World War I, World War II, which after 1945, there was a massacre in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So a lot of factors played important roles. So the British thought, how do we go about it now? So they drafted another British statute. They termed it India Independence Act 1947. So as per section 8 clause 1 of this 1947 British statute, they gave power to India. Okay, they said, okay, we'll give you certain powers, draft a constitution for yourself and declare yourself a sovereign. So a constituent assembly was crafted. Now this constituent assembly was very diverse. It ranged although it represented only roughly around 28% of the population of India because that kind of proportionate representation. So initially it had 389 members. After partition, it narrowed down to 299 members. And when the final draft was signed, it was signed by only 284 members. Dr. Rajendra Prasad was the chairman. Mr. B.N. Rao, another notable jurist, was the constitutional advisor. And I'll share in my further speech a very interesting anecdote with Felix Frankfurter and Justice Douglas from US and the Japanese Constitution. So there were a total of 13 committees, out of which the drafting committee was the main committee behind the main soul of the constitution, behind how it was drafted and how it was written. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was the chairman of the drafting committee. It took a total of 2 years, 11 months, and 17 days to complete drafting. There were a total of 11 sessions running into 165 days, and out of these 165 days, 114 days were only spent on consideration of the draft constitution. A total of 7,635 amendments were put on table, out of which 2,473 were discussed and disposed. So very hefty exercise. For a country which is only building, there was no support. Imagine a situation where this gathering alone has to do everything, right from framing of the constitution to building a parliament to building a judiciary, building state judiciaries, crafting a very delicate relationship between the states and center and the high courts and center. Because the Supreme Court does not control the high courts. High courts are constitutional. High courts are constitutional authorities in themselves. And the Attorney General for India, Solicitor General of India, the later came Advocate Generals. Everything was crafted. So a constitution like ours is a very cosmopolitan constitution. Almost roughly around 65% of the constitution has been borrowed from the government of India Act 1935. That can't be denied. But they modified it accordingly. So roughly, apart from this, now they borrowed from the United Kingdom, they borrowed the parliamentary form of government, single citizenship, rule of law, the post of and powers of speaker, legislative process, CAG, bicameral legislature. From the United States, they borrowed preamble, fundamental rights, federal structure, judicial review, powers of the Supreme Court, equal protection of laws, and functions of president. From Ireland also they borrowed the directive principles, that is DPSPs, election of the president, nomination of president to Anglo-Indians. From Canada they borrowed residuary powers and a union with a strong center. From USSR, that is erstwhile USSR, they borrowed the Planning Commission, which is now gone, 5-year plans, fundamental duties, and the expression justice in preamble. Justice, social, economic, political. From Australia, they borrowed concurrent list in the 7th schedule, that is list 3. And the trade and commerce clause is also borrowed from Australia. From Japan, they borrowed the expression used in Article 21, that is, except according to the procedure established by law. From South Africa, they borrowed the amendment procedure and the election of members to the upper house. From Germany, fortunately, unfortunately, they borrowed from Germany as well. They borrowed emergency provision and suppression of the fundamental rights. From France, they borrowed the expression republic and the expression used in preamble from the French Revolution, that is liberty, equality, and fraternity. But after these comprehensive assembly debates, they came up with a constitution of around 395 articles and 8 schedules. Subsequently, they have been increased to 10 number of articles and these parts also classified, declassified. That is full of interesting anecdotes, as I shared initially. Now, Mr. B.N. Rao was the constitutional advisor. This was very hotly debated across the Constituent Assembly, that whether due process clause should be borrowed in India or not. So Mr. B.N. Rao was advised to go to Justice Felix Frankfurter in the US and Justice Douglas. So he went to both of them, he met both of them in Australia, in US. So Justice Frankfurter advised him not to choose or not to incorporate due process clause in India because of the Lochner era, very infamous Lochner era, what happened in the US. Justice Douglas advised otherwise. Mr. B.N. Rao, fortunately, and in his very conscious mind, chose to follow Justice Frankfurter. He said, okay, we won't borrow the due process clause. But then he went to Japan and he borrowed the expression except according to the procedure established by law from the Japanese constitution, which was finally incorporated in the Article 103 data, final Article 21. So now initially due process clause, now due process majorly can be classified into either substantive or procedural. Now procedural due process is arguably already incorporated because there is a procedure established by law. Now, substantive due process was never thought to be incorporated, but slowly, gradually, through various judicial decisions, including the latest Rajpal, although its correctness has been doubted by Justice Chandrachud recently, but both of them are part and parcel of the due process now. It goes against the spirit of the Constitution, but arguably yes. Now, the fundamental rights, the part 3, again, very hotly debated. Now, the whole basis of fundamental rights, the old barons, they cried for the rights for the first time way back in 1215. So Magna Carta was formed. Now Magna Carta was written in Latin and the spoken language of that time was French. So Magna Carta, those fundamental rights given to the people, it was never to be understood, it was never to be percolated downwards. So it was formed way back in June 1215 and immediately afterwards, in August 2015, it was annulled. So Magna Carta per se was immediately nullified. Now again, while discussing the amendment clauses, a very heavy discussion on Article 368 clause 2, and there was a very heated debate on whether how long should we give it to the constitution makers or the parliament immediately after the constitution is brought in and accepted. So they debated about the Irish constitution of 1922. So Irish constitution said that okay, for first 8 years, because we are also new, there may be some fundamental errors in what we are incorporating in the constitution. So for first 8 years, amendment can be done by a simple majority. And afterwards, after 8 years, it will only be done by referendum. So very hotly debated as to why Mr. B.N. Rao said, okay, let it keep it for next 3 years instead of 8 years. Let it be because we are also human, to err is to human. We may also make few fundamental errors and which the generations will have to amend. So let it be done by a simple majority instead of giving a rigid process to amend and then this much majority and everything. They were very hotly debated. None of them was accepted. So finally, in the final shape, Article 368 came into picture. Interestingly, in 1937, the Irish Constitution did completely away with the simple majority clause and only the referendum clause was adopted. So, since then, over 100 amendments have been made in the Constitution. And interestingly, the first amendment was passed in 1951 by which the 9th schedule was inserted, which opened a complete Pandora's box. And this first amendment was brought in by the same Constituent Assembly because the first Lok Sabha elections took place in 1952. So the same people who crafted the Constitution amended it for the first time, who were all, of course, who were not directly appointed by the people of India as well. So they amended the Constitution for the first time. So the text of the written Constitution, very exhaustive in nature, lays down. Now, the Kelsey's pure theory of law again, because Constitution is the ground norm. Everything flows from the Constitution. Anything against the Constitution can be declared as unconstitutional and quashed or struck off. Coming to the unwritten Constitution. Now, there is a very celebrated doctrine of separation of powers. Now, the framers of the Constitution, in perhaps fortunately again, they didn't make a dedicated, a very rigid wall between the judiciary, the executive or the legislature, although they incorporated in Article 50 a directive principle to the state that okay, this is a directive principle, a separation of powers. One organ of the government, one organ of the state should not interfere or encroach upon powers or responsibilities of the other organ. It got diluted gradually due to successive failures of governments. The judiciary had to step in, initially for good. Lately, now there is criticism. Judicial activism has to be welcomed and is welcomed. Judicial, Mr. Sorabji coined this expression, judicial authoritarianism is bad. Judicial overreach is to be criticized. No. So the unwritten constitution is mainly doctrinal in nature. What the constitution framers brought in, the judiciary supplied to it, injected their own wisdom in it, inserted a lot of other provisions which were not found initially, struck off few of them which were brought in through amendments, like the 42nd Amendment, or it is all termed as a mini constitution in itself. So various doctrines were propounded, like we'll discuss a few of them, like basic structure doctrine. Now the text, the expression basic structure is nowhere in the constitution. It is something which was supplanted by the judiciary because it was the need of the hour. It has also a history how Pakistan Supreme Court brought in Justice Mudolkar in 1963, then finally Keshwananda Bharti basic structure was brought in. So the basic structure doctrine says that okay, you do anything with the constitution, you amend it because you are the direct will of the representatives of the people, you amend it, you have the power to amend it, but you can't alter the basic structure. Now the expression basic structure, what all is included in basic structure is not exhaustive. There are a few examples. Independence of judiciary is a basic structure. Now there have been attempts by the executive to take into their command appointments, complete appointments of made to the higher judiciary. The Supreme Court said no, can't be done. The expression consultation in Article 124 clause 2 was held to be concurrence. All these things, lot of factors play into role. So one of the doctrines is the basic structure doctrine. Then there is doctrine of arbitrariness. So Article 14 says equality and equal protection of laws. Then they brought in two expressions, intelligible differentia, rational nexus. Then they moved one step forward, the judiciary moved one step forward in EPO as well. They said arbitrariness. Recently, in the Triple Talaq judgment, Justice Nariman has written 40 odd pages, and I've criticized it very heavily. That instead of checking it on a lot of conspects, is gone into arbitrariness. Instead of declaring how Triple Talaq is arbitrary, he said, okay, it is arbitrary, and on basis of arbitrariness, it is void of Article 14. So this arbitrariness doctrine was coined, that if something, an executive act or a legislative act is arbitrary, it can be quashed to be violative of Article 14. Then the doctrine of public interest litigation. It relaxes the basic rule of locus standi. That a group of people who can't approach the court directly, don't have the resources, one single man or one single organization who is not connected with them can approach the constitutional courts and ask them, please issue a writ to this effect and help the downtrodden. Slowly the concept of sponsored PILs also came. Corporate rivalry got mixed up with it, and it became products of corporate rivalries. One corporate group who didn't get a tender went to the court through some another organization, asked for a writ, let it quashed. But the doctrine is beautiful. Then a very interesting doctrine of prospective overruling. It has also been incorporated in India. It says that what has been done is done. We are overruling this prospectively. Beautiful doctrine. Then there is the doctrine of proportionality. Proportionality works in two angles. It makes it mandatory for the state to use the least injurious means available to it. Now, recently in a judgment, Justice Thakur upheld the constitutionality of Section 364, Clause A of IPC. He said the punishment given to somebody who kidnaps for ransom, the punishment given is death. He said this is proportional. Now, all these, a long list of ancillary factors come into picture. Paternalism, hard and soft, legal feudalism. That all you'll gradually learn in your courses. But this is how the whole system of unwritten constitution works. It has been supplanted by the judiciary. Then recently we had a doctrine of now we all go to the movies. There's national anthem played in the backdrop, you have to stand. The Supreme Court made it mandatory. And they used a German doctrine of constitutional patriotism. Now this doctrine was never used in India, never borrowed in India earlier. This is Deepak Mishra in an interim order brought it to us. They said, the order said that constitutional patriotism is a fundamental necessity today. So he asked everybody to stand up when the national anthem is played, irrespective of whether you are going for recreation or entertainment. Now there is doctrine of implied inhibitions, that the Constitution itself has implied inhibitions in it, which was initially crafted by Justice H.R. Khanna in the case of Tabaki, which was a celebrated judgment. Then there is the doctrine of public trust doctrine, natural resources, that the state is only the trustee of people are actually beneficiaries. Constitutional morality, constitutional conventions, cross-constitutional borrowing, what to borrow from a constitution, because initially I shared with you a long list of provisions in the constitution which were borrowed from different jurisdictions. So cross-constitutional borrowing, how does it work in India? That is all about very important. So in my view, we have a written constitution, we have an unwritten constitution, and our constitution is held to be dynamic and unstatic. It is living and breathing. Charles Evan Hughes, the 10th CJI of the Supreme Court of the US, declared, we are under a constitution, but the constitution is what the judges say it is. That is why the whole concept of written and unwritten constitution becomes very important. With this, I'll hand over to Mr. Bhaskar and we'll join for the questionnaire session later. Thank you so much.